Welcome back to Athens Happens. I'm Ayden McDougle, digital content producer for The New Political.
And I'm Taylor Scheider, digital content creator for The New Political.
Athens Happens is a podcast brought to you by The New Political, a student publication dedicated to explaining the nuances of Ohio University, Athens, and state politics.
You can find episodes at thenewpolitical.com or on YouTube.
As you all know, we are entering OU Halloween weekend. The annual block party is on Saturday from 5:45 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. Hundreds of people will gather on Court Street to dress up and listen to music. So, with the city gearing up to host more people than usual, Athens Police Department is expecting to have a large presence.
Considering this, it's really important to know your rights as a student and as a guest of a student. And that's exactly what we're going to be chatting about today. We have Ashlyn Sleesman, the Director of Students Defending Students here at Ohio University, to talk about the community standards process at OU and to provide just some general tips for the upcoming weekend. Do you mind introducing yourself and explaining what Students Defending Students is?
Yeah, first, thank you guys for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. As Taylor mentioned, I am Ashlyn Sleesman. I'm a senior here at OU, and I study political science, pre-law, and social work, as well as with a certificate in law, justice, and culture. So Students Defending Students is a student org filled with student volunteers, and we just help other peer students. We help them navigate the university's judicial process. So students who have alleged violations of the code of conduct, we just help them understand the process and the hearings that they're going to be attending.
When you say that you help them or guide them, in what ways? How do they find you? What does that process look like?
Right. So usually after an alleged incident occurs, they receive a letter through their student email from the CSSR office, which stands for the Center for Standards and Student Responsibility. And that letter will tell them about the incident, and that report will either come from an RA or the AUPD or OUPD, and the letter will put some resources at the end of the letter, and Students Defending Students is one of those resources. And so we do an intake with them, and we just help them understand how the hearing, unravels, I guess to say.
So, like we said before, with Halloween right around the corner, and what are more of the common cases that you see through the SDS office when things happen to occur over Halloween weekend with students?
So some of the most common cases that we see in our office would be a D3A, which is possession or consumption of alcohol. And
No way.
Right. And then along with that would be the D4A, which would be possession or, consumption of drugs. So those both walk hand in hand, and they're fairly common for us to deal with as an office. And a lot of the times, tagged onto those charges will be something called a D18B, which stands for complicity or failure to be a better bystander. And so that just means if you're in a situation and a violation of the code of conduct is occurring and you don't step in. So that's fairly common, and you can get that charge without a drug or alcohol charge. So if you're there and you're quote unquote complicit, it's a fairly common charge in our office. Same with, I would say, fake ID, which is a D2A. That's also another fairly common charge that we see in our office.
Does SDS deal with a lot of stuff off campus, or is it all mostly on campus stuff?
I would say a fair mix of both. So we get many reports and clients coming in who are in the dorms, so obviously on campus, but we also get many clients coming in who are, the upperclassmen, juniors and seniors living off campus, because this is very important to note that you are a Bobcat on and off campus. So it might seem silly, but you could be at home for the weekend and get charged with something. If the university happens to find out about it, you can go through their judicial process. So you are a Bobcat on and off campus, and we see clients coming in from on and off campus. So
How does the community standards process differ from the legal process? Do they go through both? Is it at the same time? Is it concurring? What does that look like?
Right. So yes and no. They can happen at the same time. They also don't have to. We see many students who, they're out underage drinking and they get booked on a weekend and they go through the local court process, and then months later they get a letter from the CSSR office, and that is fairly common. But it could also happen at the same time. So you get charged on the weekend. The following Monday, you could get a letter in your email. So they are two different processes, and that's important to note. We have many clients who often get charges dropped in court, and so they'll come into our office and still worried, but they'll say, well, this got dropped in court. Why am I having to go through the university's judicial process? And it's so hard explaining to them that they're two completely different things. And even though the burden of proof is higher in court, the university still follows up with that. So that's important to note, that even if you get the charges dropped or even expunged at the local court, you still most likely will have to follow up with the university.
Right. And it's interesting, too, that you mentioned burden of proof, because from my understanding, like, the burden of proof in a criminal case going through court is beyond a reasonable doubt. So sometimes it's harder to meet that burden. They can't prove that there's no other, like, reasonable explanation to what happened, so the charges will get dropped in court. But the burden of proof in a community standards conference is, like, fancy term is preponderance of evidence, but in simpler terms, it's just, did the alleged thing, is it more likely than not that the alleged thing occurred? So if we're looking at a drinking case, if somebody had a drink in their hand and they're sitting there saying, hey, I didn't drink it, well, maybe you can't meet beyond a reasonable doubt that they drank it or they consumed it, but you can decide that it was more likely than not that they drank it. So that makes sense that some students would get charged through the school but not through the court. But I can see how that would be, like, a frustrating process, for somebody who's, like, not in law, they're not understanding, like, the difference between those burdens and, like, assuming that you'd be treated the same in court as you would in a community standards conference. So that makes me wonder, when students are coming in to the office to do an intake, like, what is their emotional state like? How are you usually, seeing them and talking to them?
Right. So the emotional state, I would say it ranges, but nervous would be very common for students. And, they have a lot of anxiety about the situation, especially if they haven't gone through the court process. And so oftentimes they're wanting us to talk about that too. And at that point we have to, refer them to the Center for Student Legal Services. But the nerves are high all around. Oftentimes students can be embarrassed too, so it's just really important we make sure in our training process for students defending students, our reps know how to handle and navigate that situation and just really approach it with an empathetic, understanding point of view, because it's really important, and at the end of the day we're there to help the students navigate that situation. And so I think that's really why SDS is so important, because even if all we do at the end of the day is help bring a student's nerves down, I walk away feeling good. And the more information a student knows going into that hearing, the less likely that they'll be, nervous and anxious and all of those other feelings that come with that situation. So, we approach it with trying to help them understand everything that they're going to be going through, so that way they're not walking in blindly. We're really just, there to be an advisor for them.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Even before any student would ever have to walk into the SDS office, what are things like they should know or do beforehand so they don't even have to deal with any of this in the first place?
I would just say be aware of, obviously in a perfect world, every student's aware of the code of conduct and they're not violating it, but that's not how it is. That's not how college is. And so we do try and preemptively, quote unquote, warn students and just give them as much education as we can. So I know I have mentioned earlier that one of the most common charges is a D18B, so complicity and failing to be a better bystander. So a lot of times I just talk about know your friend group, know who you're with, and just be smart about that and navigate that in the best way you can, especially if you know that some of them will be drinking or other things. So yeah, just be a good friend and a good bystander. And I'm trying to think some other things that we like to tell students, just going into the weekends and other, especially Halloween weekend. If you have a fake ID, do not give that to an officer. And this is not me not encouraging anything to do with fake IDs, but it's not a good idea to carry that in a bag, in a wallet, anything of that nature. It's always just keep that on your person is important. And something else is, if you are at a house party or anything of that nature, stay on the lawn. And if you have any sort of container, stay on the lawn and do not, cross that line into the sidewalk. Make sure you have discarded your drink before you decide to leave and start walking on the sidewalk. So those are some things that are coming to mind right away. And God forbid you do come into contact with law enforcement this weekend or any other weekend, just know you are not required to answer any questions. You do have to identify yourself if they ask you to. One of the most important things, if you should always just ask the police, am I being detained? If the answer is no, then you are free to go. If the answer is no, you're free to go. If you are being detained, the answer is yes. Just clearly and loudly state that you are going to remain silent, you would like a lawyer, and that you do not give consent to a search. They can search you if they have a warrant, and there are a few other reasons that they would be able to, but just state those things. You would like to remain silent, you would like a lawyer, and at that point you could later follow up with the Center for Student Legal Services, and you do not consent to a search. So those are just some of the things that come to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like things that can apply to all students too. I'm wondering, what are specific things that may apply to students that are in the dorms?
Right. So that's a good question. The first things that is coming to mind, complaints about noise. So noise complaints often lead to many other incidents. So if there's a noise complaint, if you have alcohol or if you are violating any of the codes of conduct, just be aware that an RA can show up at your door, and if they come in or not, they are not allowed to open any of your cupboards, or they just aren't allowed to open anything, is just what you should know. And so just know that noise complaints will often lead to RAs coming at your door. Whether you're okay with that or not, that often happens. It's very common. It's how many clients, when they come into SDS, that's how the stories often start, that there was a noise complaint, and that leads to other things. And then also, it's really important to note that if you have any friends coming over, and let's say they're over 21, they bring alcohol or any other sort of illegal substance for people under 21, that you are as young as the person in the dorm. And what I mean by, let's say you're 18 or 19 or 20, and that's why you're in a dorm, you are that age. Even if you're 21, you are legally 18 in that dorm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like if somebody over 21 was visiting and had alcohol, if let's say it were me and I get caught with that alcohol in my room, it's like the guest is on me. Like I'm taking that liability. Yeah.
So, during Halloween weekend, but also any other weekend, when you have guests come, you are completely responsible and liable for that guest. So even if they, break something in the room, that it's the same thing as if you did it yourself. So just know that, especially going into Halloween weekend, that you are responsible for that guest. And also, just as a general rule, there shouldn't be any alcohol or drugs in the dorms at all. So just be aware of that.
Ayden, do you know what the policies for Halloween this year look like? Because I remember when we were in the dorms, it was COVID, and so things were kind of weird, but are people allowed to have guests?
Yeah, so The guest policy for this year is residents may register one guest per Halloween weekend. So from October 25th to 27th, one resident can have one guest, and they have to fill out a registration form. There's a $50 fee to fill out that form. The guest registration timeline was from October 7th all the way until October 16th, so that time has already passed. So if you didn't get a guest registered and you have one over to the dorm, I mean, you might get hit with an extra fee on top of that. If you get caught, then it'll be a $100 unapproved guest fee, because every resident in a dorm gets a wristband, and then if they have a guest that is registered, that guest will also get a wristband. And then they may be subject to community standards referral, and then go through the community standards process, and then maybe end up at the SDS process after that.
And students are more likely to get caught doing something wrong on Halloween weekend because the RAs are posted up. Like, the training for a Halloween weekend in my short time as an RA, and in just communication with other RAs, like, they are standing at sitting at every single entrance of any given building, right? And they're being told even more than usual, if you see something, you have to report it.
But even beginning Friday, the 25th at 5 p.m., all exterior doors from the residence halls outside of the main entrance will be inaccessible. Swipe access to all exterior doors will be returned on Sunday, October 27th at 12 p.m. Oh, wow. So you can only get in through that front door, and there will definitely be at least 4 RAs right around there, just making sure everything's fine and safe in the way that they are supposed to.
I thought of a few extra things that students should be aware of, not only on Halloween weekend, but any weekend. So if you have been drinking and you're not feeling like yourself or good enough to drive, please don't drive. Utilize the cat cabs. They are a great resource, and I know you might not feel like it or know how to get them on the phone. It's on the back of your student ID. The phone number to cat cab is on the back of your student ID. So please utilize that. We wouldn't want to see anything bad happen. And even on the minimum side, we just don't want to see you in our office, really. So just utilize that. And also, this isn't quite following that order, but Borgs are open containers. I'm not sure people are going to be walking around with Borgs on Halloween weekend. That seems like more of a fall or spring activity, but just know they are considered open containers. So once again, that goes back to what I said, stay on the lawn with that sort of thing, and just don't be walking around on sidewalks or streets. And then also, any student who goes through the judicial process at OU and is under 21, it's really, really important to know that the CSSR office sends a letter home to the address you have registered with the university. And this letter it's vague, which is the one benefit, in my opinion, that it's vague, but it will just notify your parents or whatever guardian you have listed at that address that they need to have a conversation with you about alcohol or drugs. And so that's not always safe for some students for that letter to be sent to their home address. So we just like to make sure that students are aware that that is happening, whether they need to go and intercept that. So that's just important to know. And CSSR office doesn't always let students know that. So
I'm interested. So I know parents can't see, let's say, like a student's grades if a student doesn't give them permission. So what about an alcohol or substance abuse violation? How is their right to having their information protected any different?
That's a really good question. I don't think we've gotten the answer to that. I mean, there has been a lot of pushback about this letter being sent out. That was fairly new. I want to say it was introduced last year, and I know our office was not a fan. I'm not, I guess, afraid to say we are not the biggest supporters of that being sent home. And well, I should say, I'm not the biggest. I can't speak for the org, but I don't see more benefit in that. Yeah, that's just my opinion, but yeah, that's a hard question. I'm not sure that there is an answer. I don't think parents would have to obviously know their students' information to even get into their student center and to be able to access that kind of information. But I think the way that the university is allowed to send that letter is because of its vagueness, if that makes sense. So they're not technically infringing upon FERPA because of how vague it is. It does not go into any of the details of the report that the office receives. It's vague in the sense that it just says, have a conversation with your student about alcohol and drugs, and then the parent or guardian is left to fill in the blanks. So I'm sure that's how they are able to send that out.
When you say the report that the office receives, I'm curious, when the Community Standards Conference reaches out to somebody, what information are they receiving that's triggering them to send an email to that student that they need to have a meeting with them?
Right. So the information that they're receiving is often coming from the three main sources, really. So RA reports, and RA will fill out a incident report, and that gets sent to the CSSR office. OUPD, they fill out a police report, and AUPD fill out a police report when an incident happens on or off campus. And so all three of those reports are often sent to the Community Standards office. Okay. So that's where they're getting that information from.
Oh yeah, back to your point before, like Cat Cab is entirely free, so students don't have to pay for that. And then what you're talking about with Borgs being open containers, quite literally anything that doesn't have a sealed cap on it is an open container. If you have a water bottle, you put vodka in it, and it was open, that is an open container. Just because it has a cap on it doesn't make it a closed container. If the cap is like open or broken in any way, that is entirely open.
Yeah, a Yeti cup.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Open container, which is a common misconception.
Yeah. Yeah, and to go off of that, I just think students should be aware of the things that they're carrying. And I mentioned earlier, if you are going to have a fake ID, again, not encouraging or promoting that in any sense, but if you are going to have a fake ID, do not keep that in any sort of bag or, wallet or anything on you. Physically, if you are going to have it on you, and I'm meaning that as in if you need to put it somewhere on you, right. Not in a bag or anything of that nature. And the same applies for alcohol or any drugs. So just be aware as you're walking around, again, Halloween weekend or any other weekend, that law enforcement officers can find a reason to search your bags or anything that you're carrying. So I'm not saying that they, obviously would have a warrant or have a reason, but if they did, just be aware of that. So as you're, packing your bags when you're going out, just, again, be aware of that. And if you do decide to give them your ID, make sure it's your actual ID, please.
No matter how intoxicated you are, take a second.
Take a second, collect yourself. And again, you can follow those steps I told you earlier. If you're not being detained, you're free to go. So, but you do have to identify yourself. So just, again, make sure it's your correct ID, slow down, and yeah.
Oh, something that I thought of to keep in mind is if you have to go to the bathroom, for the love of God, do not do it outside. The police will clock it so fast every single time. And I know it's like, okay, well then where am I supposed to go to the bathroom? Well, keep in mind that your student ID has access to the classroom buildings that you major in. So for example, I'm a school of communication studies student. I have swipe access to Schoonover every day, all day. So worst case scenario, you can go to a classroom building if your dorm or your home is even farther than that. But you also can just find the nearest bathroom. It's never worth it, even if you think it's just going to take a few seconds, it's never worth it because that is also something that the police are always on the lookout for. And it's just kind of like a like a bit of an embarrassing charge. I mean, nothing's embarrassing to come to the students defending students with ever. But I just am talking like in general. It's not a fun charge to have to deal with. I'm not speaking from personal experience, I swear. But just like, as you could imagine, wouldn't be a good charge.
It's like one of those gotcha charges. And I actually had that. It's a common charge that I think we deal with, and I would say it's honestly increasing the public indecency charges. So, yeah, again, just not saying that you're gonna sit here and think about where you could use the bathroom before you go out, but honestly, it's not a bad idea. Let's think about how Donkey is open till 12 p.m. every night. So just be aware of those places, before you go. And yeah, that was a really great point, and I wanted to bring that up. Public indecency charges are on the rise, and they're easy to pick up. So just be aware of where you can use the bathroom and how to get there.
So when I started here as a freshman a few years ago, obviously there was a police presence, and obviously people were getting charged with things, and that always existed. But it's seeming to me that under the new administration, when I say that, I mean the new chief of police and I mean the new president of the university, it seems like they have a mission more so than previous administrations to decrease drinking on campus. And that can include, increased RA training, more of a police presence. And I mean that in polices are in more spaces and there are just more police. So that's something to keep in mind during this Halloween season. If you have guests or friends or family that have been here before, maybe under more chillaxed OU rules, that genuinely isn't how it is anymore. Things don't fly the same way that they used to. And, that's just something that we have to bite the bullet on and move forward with as, students as an organization. That means more cases for them. Our judicial system, that means more cases for them. That means more work on the police. But overall, as a student or a guest visiting, it's just super important to keep that in mind, that it's not the same as it always has been.
I mean, yeah, because even, I don't know, you talk to family members or meet someone and say, oh, I go to Ohio University, one of the first things that come out of their mouth is, oh, you go to a party school, or, oh, how are the Halloweens there? And it's different now than definitely what it was before, because, I mean, throughout how many years, even from, President Gonzalez we have now, but even before with, Sherman, or even after that, everyone after that, it's been a big push from the university side to dispel this party school narrative because, I mean, I don't think a school really wants to be labeled that as much, but then, because then it discredits them as a university, and then it doesn't seem like everything they offer on the academic level isn't to the highest standards, when now they're really pushing, hey, we're really good in this department, we're really good in this department, this is great, but at the forefront of everyone's minds when they hear Ohio University, they're, oh, party school.
Right. And I don't think people are drinking any less.
No, I don't think it's any less at all from what I've understood. I mean, yeah, maybe in 80s, 90s parties were bigger, specifically the Halloween parties and stuff, but now it's kind of shifted a little bit, but maybe shifted towards the safer side of things to where people aren't getting, drunk and belligerent to people, and it's kind of stays in the safer lane.
Which is good.
Yeah, which
obviously.
is positive.
Yeah. I do think Halloween is a time to have fun. Obviously, know your rights, but also, do your thing. Spend time with your friends, get dressed up, take part of the block party. It's actually going to be my first time ever going to the block party. I'm super excited. I'm going with my roommates. So don't let, all of these things scare you. Just be safe and be smart, honestly.
If a student ends up in a situation where they happen to need SDS, where can they find you guys?
Right. So we're in Baker, right across from Student Senate. Our room number is 302, so the third level. Really hard to miss us because, again, we're under that student government sign. And you can always email us at studentsdefendingstudents@gmail.com. That's all lowercase, all together. And you can also call us at 740-593-4045. And we have office hours Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's a bit different this semester just because we had difficulty getting all of our rep schedules to align with that. But
on our door, we do have the scheduled hours. So yeah, that's where you can find us or contact us.
So we want to thank you for being here, and thank you for giving us all the insight, and maybe all the students a whole lot more insight on staying safe and staying out of legal troubles or any trouble this Halloween weekend, so they can stay safe and have fun. So thank you so much.
I want to say thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun, and I'm always willing and want to talk to students and spread the word, because I think it's great the more educated they can be on this sort of thing. And again, there's no embarrassment, no shame. We just want to help. So yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a great time.
Yeah, of course. And that's a wrap for this episode of Athens Happens. If you're interested in joining the New Political, come see us in the Radio Television Communication Building on Sundays from 7 to 8 p.m. Also, make sure to check us out at thenewpolitical.com for more podcast episodes and other content. Thank you, and until next time.